Truth Hour. Healthcare Exposed with S.R. Ridley, a nurse you can trust.
Welcome back to Truth Hour, Healthcare Exposed, and I am S.R. Ridley, a nurse you can trust. In today's episode, you will learn three things. One, we will continue the saga of who are the two most dangerous nurses existing from coast to coast in emergency rooms throughout this great nation. And two, we will learn the what, the why, the when, the how, and the where. How we can attack this problem and eradicate it. And then finally, you are going to learn how you are going to use these two tools to arm yourself so that you can be safe in today's emergency room. Now, this is a continuation, so I hope you saw the first episode last week. And for those you did, thank you for listening. In last week's episode, we spoke about the first most dangerous nurse in the emergency room, the float nurse. And I gave you 7 questions to ask to ensure your safety. If you haven't seen it, please go back and watch it, because today we are going to move on to the new graduate nurse. Now, on the other hand, the new graduate nurse is the true example that we have cultivated ourselves into a society that champions ignorance and relegates experience. These non-critically thinking individuals should never, ever enter an emergency room after graduating from nursing school. Now you may say, S.R. Ridley, you're being a little bit extreme. I sound extreme. No, throughout this very brief, I promised a friend of mine not to go off on a tangent that I've known for about 3 years. He told me he had ADHD, and he said my last video was a little lengthy. So I promised him that this one will be short, factual, and to the point. Now, see, 9 years ago, there was a nurse who did some research, and she desecrated the field of nursing. She said that new nurses should train new nurses, and now you have a generation of nurses who lack the ability to critically think. Now, what does that equate to you, the patient? That equates pure danger. Danger. See, the reason why you cannot come directly from nursing school to an emergency room, because in the emergency room, you only have a patient for 30 minutes to 4 hours. When these individuals have to have a patient longer than that, they're flustered. They have left the ER, they've quit because they're completely overwhelmed and bewildered. See, first you have to learn how to be a nurse. When you come to the emergency room, you become what I call the ultimate detective. You take all those abilities to critically think, you hone them in so that you can rapidly assess and execute. Because when you first enter the emergency room, your first line of defense is the nurse. The nurse has to be able to look at you, diagnose you, and determine where you need to go. Do you need to go to a place where the care is serious but urgent? Do you need to be seen immediately by a doctor, or do you need to be taken directly to the emergency bay? Those are 3 critical points that the nurse has to be able to assess. But when you come from nursing school only gives you a Snapchat view of different parts of nursing, different disciplines. It doesn't teach you how to be a nurse in a particular field. It gives you an overall view. That's why that first preceptor is priceless. So when you have new nurses training new nurses, what you have is a generation of what I call robotic-like nurse imitators. These individuals lack the ability to critically think. Now you can say, okay, but that's why we have a doctor. No! Nurses do not follow a physician blindly. In the 90s, we came up with teen nursing. And we came up with teen nursing because people were going to the emergency rooms and to the ORs, and they were getting the wrong leg taken off, the wrong ovary removed. Just things were just done wrong. There was always one person in the room who thought that it was the wrong thing, but they did not speak up because they felt that the physician knew what they were doing. So we came up with team nursing, and with team nursing, everyone has a voice. But if you haven't learned what that voice is, then how do you know when to speak up? This is why it is imperative for the new graduate nurse to go somewhere where they can maintain and care for a patient for more than 30 minutes to 4 hours, because they have to learn how to be a nurse. I spoke to a new graduate nurse. She said this to me, true story. She said, well, don't you think that after 2 years we're safe? No, not just myself. The American Nurse Association, the Emergency Nurse Association, and the Institute of Medicine all say the same thing. They lack the ability to critically think when you begin your nursing career in the emergency room. But here's the real question that I asked her. The problem is that you don't think that you're safe until 2 years. So what happened to all those patients you took care of within those 2 years when you were not safe in your own mind? Did they deserve unsafe health care? True story. You know I like true stories. There was a patient, 25-year-old, who entered an emergency room. And if you look right up here, you see it. He entered the emergency room and he complained of a headache. The nurse, I truly don't know how she got this, she made this error. I really don't know how she made this error. But the new nurse grabbed the wrong bottle of medication. Now, little valve, big valve. This big valve has powder in it. This is a liquid. She gave that patient, that 25-year-old, a medication that completely paralyzed him, and she never realized she did this. He died the most emotionally drenching way that you could ever die. While people fear anesthesia, he was locked in, and that means that he felt every breath leave his body. She never realized her mistake. That patient died. Now, the real question you should be asking, this happened at Vanderbilt Hospital, in case any of you out there want to double check me. When a patient enters the emergency room in most states, when they die within 24 hours, it has to be reported to the state. They have to have an autopsy. They have to go to what we call the ME's office. How was this missed? Because this was caught 18 months later on a routine investigation by the state, and the state threatened to shut Vanderbilt Hospital down until they did extraneous teaching. But here's the thing. I wish I could tell you that was the first time that happened. But the reason that is not the first time, because I have personally witnessed the same accident. The problem is that there were experienced nurses around that was able to stop the error from happening, and the patient had a breathing tube placed and was able to recover from the paralytic. But the question is what is a life worth? What is your life worth? That 25-year-old, he did not deserve to die. You see, today's emergency rooms are impregnated with 85 to 90% of all new graduate nurses. So what do? This episode is not long enough for me to give you all the tools you need to stay safe. And this is why this ER safety checklist, you need to download it. Go to the website, areyousafeintoday'sers.com. Download, keep it on your phone, because you never know when you're going to end up in an emergency room. But what's truly going to keep you safe is this book, because I'm going to tell you, and what I've told you is what they don't want me to tell you. At the end of every chapter, there is a bottom line, and I spell out every question that you need to ask. Let me tell you one first question. Free question. When you enter an emergency room and they bring you back to your room, the first thing you're going to ask the person that's bringing you back to the room, have you told my nurse that I am in the room? Asking that one question just might save your life. Before you ask that question, you're definitely going to ask that person what their name is, because this establishes accountability. And you need that accountability to make sure that they are telling you the truth. True story. There was a patient having a heart attack. She was in the room for 4 hours. 4 hours at this particular hospital. And this particular hospital is the worst hospital that I have ever worked in 21 years. I have a blog coming out, The Worst Hospital. Now, I can't tell you the hospital's name, but I am telling you that this is the worst hospital I have ever worked in my entire career. In this hospital, they have 95% new graduate nurses in their emergency room, and they tell them, when you're going to be admitted to the hospital, normally you would inform the nurse that's on the floor where you're going. You give a report, and the nurse knows you're coming. But in this hospital, they instruct the new nurses not to call, to just send the patient up. So I'm giving a report to this new nurse, true story. And during the report process, the patient received a room assignment to the hospital. And I asked the new nurse, I said, she started to call transport to get the transporter to come and get a patient that she didn't even get a report on. She didn't know anything about the patient. And here's why they're dangerous, okay? I gotta tell you this. So what she did was, that patient was having an active heart attack. I mean, an active heart attack. And sometimes in hospitals, when they don't have a room on the necessary unit that you need to go to, what they do is they do an overflow. So they send you to another unit. She was actually going to an observational unit. So the new nurse just saw that she was going to an observational unit, didn't look at her diagnosis, didn't look that she was supposed to go to a cardiac unit. She sent the patient up that she didn't know anything about, never called the nurse, never told the nurse the patient was coming. She was supposed to transport that patient herself on a cardiac monitor because that 52-year-old lady was having an active heart attack. She sent that patient up with a transporter, no cardiac monitor, never told the nurse, so the patient could go upstairs, continue having a heart attack, and be in the room until the nurse just stumbled upon the patient being in the room. Now, ask yourself, are you safe in today's ERs? You see, nurses have to know the why. If you don't know the why, then you won't know the why not. And if you don't know the why not, then you won't know when to question. See, we don't follow physicians blindly. This is a team art form, okay? If they don't know when to question, then they won't know when to not give the medication. True story. There are 3 drugs given to a patient when the patient's on death row. One of those patients, the drug that actually kills you, is potassium. I have a blog coming out called Doctors and Nurses and Pharmacists Who Kill. Now, here's the question. This new grad had the bag of potassium running wide open without an IV pump. Potassium, if you don't remember anything I tell you from today, potassium always goes on an IV pump. I cannot tell you how many times in my career I have seen nurses hang potassium and let it run in. It will cause you harm. Now, the normal dose that you can get through a regular little IV that goes into your arm, a little plastic we put in that most people think is a needle, but it's not, is 10 milliequivalents. She was giving this patient 40 wide open. 10 was supposed to go over an hour. She almost gave the patient 40, but I stopped her. And I believe as experienced nurses, it is our job to implement teaching moments to the new nurses, okay? But this is what I'm telling you. If you have new nurses, new docs, and new nurse practitioners, new physician assistants, who asked who? The doctor wrote the order wrong. The pharmacist put the order through wrong. So when the poor new nurse saw the bag, she saw 40 of potassium to go in over an hour. In her mind, that's a bolus. A bolus is when you just open it wide open and you let it just flood in, just like Niagara Falls. In the news now, 34 patients died from lethal overdose of the opiate fentanyl. The normal dose of fentanyl is usually 25 to 100. These nurses gave 800. and they killed 34 patients. So my question to you, how many more have to die before you join me? Chapter 10, the bottom line, and we resurrect a healthcare with a conscience, not some of the times, but all of the times. And remember, I love new graduate nurses. I trained 26. They just don't belong in the emergency room. They need to be trained properly, and they need to have some experience because your life matters. Remember, nurses are the foot soldiers and the soul of healthcare. Nurses are the rhythm that keeps the drum of life continuing to beat. Without properly educated nurses, death is sure to ensue. And as my good friend TYM, a certified registered nurse anesthetist, a CRNA once said, nurses are the last line of defense for patient safety. We are your patient advocate. Now, I don't want to leave you just on doom and gloom, because I know my show, some people say, it frightens them to know the truth. But you have to know the truth, because your life, your mom's life, your dad's life, your children's life, somebody that you care for, their lives matter. I have 2 children. They're my jewels. And I'm telling you as a mom, and they're adults, that there is nothing that I wouldn't do to protect both of them. Why? Because not only am I a mom, I'm a nurse. And to be a nurse means to minister to the ill and sick. Now, as I promised my good friend for over 3 years, that I would keep this short, much shorter than the last one. So I just want to thank you for joining me for part 2 of the 2 most dangerous nurses in the emergency room, the float nurse and the ER nurse. And how do we make a change? We make a change through these 2 items. So go to Amazon now and download the book that saved millions, Are You Safe in Today's ERs? 10 things you need to know that will save your life. And then go to the website, areyousafeintoday'sERs.com, and download your free ER safety checklist. And remember, I, SR Ridley, a nurse you can trust, want to tell you that in healthcare, all life matters. See you next Wednesday at 8 p.m. for part 3 of the 2 most dangerous nurses in the ER. And we will talk about the token, for sale, charge nurses who will dispose of you by any means necessary. See you next week. Are you safe in today's ERs?
Thank you, and see you next Wednesday for Truth Hour, Healthcare Exposed. And don't forget to click that button now and subscribe, comment, share, and like. And then I, SR Ridley, a nurse you can trust, want you to get mad and hashtag My Life Matters and let healthcare know that you are not going to take it anymore. Because in healthcare, all lives matter. Are you safe in today's ERs? Next Wednesday.